Anyway, I tell you it's 6 o'clock, and
Yes.
I think we need to, and we have got 15 people, so it's as good as any to make a start, and more people will be joining, I'm sure. Yeah, and let's make a start. Uh, okay,
Okay.
welcome to you, all of you, to today's program. I just seen Anthony and Luke. Welcome to both of you as well, and Marilyn. Okay, welcome. So, and Bernie, welcome. So today, what we are discussing is world peace in peril, challenging false narratives. Dear friends, my name is Vijay Mehta. I am the chair of Uniting for Peace and author of How Not Go to War. Let me show the book, How Not to Go to War, and several other books. Allow me to say a few words about our organization, Uniting for Peace. Working for 40,
Hello.
yes, okay, working working for 43 years, Uniting for Peace is a non-profit organization devoted to creating and promoting a global culture of peace, non-violence, poverty reduction, and sustainable development. Among its core aims is to establish peace teams and departments for peace at cabinet level in all countries of the world, abolishing wars, militarism, and arms trade, including nuclear and conventional weapons, and the savings achieved by this reduction to be deployed for promoting culture of peace, poverty reduction, mitigation of climate change, and bringing social justice. Welcome again to all of you. And now I'm going to start with my presentation as I am your first speaker. Dear friends, in a headline on 16th of November in the Times newspaper, the headline said the following: Russians aim for a fatal strike on Poland. London risks dragging NATO into conflict. Just imagine the headlines. Next day, Poland's president and Poland's prime minister came with a statement that it was not Russian missiles at all that killed 2 people, but a Ukrainian one. The point I'm trying to make is such a misleading media statement can trigger a World War III. The same story, my friends, was repeated by CBS, CNN, and NBC, saying Russia struck Poland by missile.
Mhm.
The reason why world peace is in peril. Because we live in an age of misinformation, rhetoric, and propaganda. The brainwashing is so thorough that Western societies are programmed to swallow a pack of lies. So, friends, how can we work in harmony to tackle the complex issues facing the world today, where the poorest are facing a chronic cost of living crisis, increasing food prices, where people are forced to choose between eating and eating, and how to prevent economic downturn, wealth inequality, global tensions as the world is in the grip of terrifying nuclear warfare. And, and if you want, at the same time, the military spending in 2021 has shot up to 2.1 trillion US dollars. So how do we institutionalize peace in this kind of atmosphere? I'm going to start by some misinformation and distortion of facts. Media about China, Palestine, and Yemen, about Brexit, about Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning. And after doing all that, I will chart out a map for way forward. Dear friends, we live in a society where brainwashing is insidious and relentless, and perception is filtered according to the needs and lies of the state and corporate power. Today, the most profitable wars for weapon industry have their own brand. They're called forever wars. Afghanistan, Palestine, Iraq, Libya, Yemen, and now Ukraine. All are based on pack of lies. Iraq is the most infamous, with its weapons of mass destruction that did not exist. NATO's destruction of Libya in 2011 was justified by a massacre in Benghazi. That did not happen. Afghanistan was a convenient revenge for the 9/11. It had nothing to do with the people of Afghanistan. Let me move on to China, Palestine, and Yemen. China was very good, but in 10 years, last 10 years, from a good China, it has become a bad China. From a world's workshop to a budding news center. Much of the propaganda originates in the US and is transmitted through proxies and spreading lies, and up to the extent saying Chinese as rats, flies, mosquitoes, pests, and called for these pests to be eradicated. We need to foster cooperation with China to solve global problems. And it's very counterproductive as they are one of the biggest corporate and economic power in the 21st century. Palestine, dear friends, has been misreported as long as I can remember. There is a conflict of two narratives. Longest, most brutal, known as military occupation in modern times, Israel is unmentionable. Dear friends, the people of Yemen barely exist. Their media unfeatured, while the Saudis rain down their American cluster bombs with British advisors working alongside the Saudi targeting officers more than and more than 500,000 children is starvation. Let me move on to the lies and misinformation about Brexit. I hope all the foreign distribution people today know what Brexit means, which is like United Kingdom going away from European Union. Let's start with the distorted facts by mainly politicians and the media. Using Brexit campaign, public was all by misinformed and manipulated to vote for Brexit without any good proof what they were voting for. Now we know that the disastrous decision to leave European Union, the biggest marketplace and economy in the world. At that time, the Leave campaign funded. I just been told by Bernie that he can't listen what I'm saying. Is that the from everyone?
Yes.
Yes.
You were
Yes.
quite faded.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
Vijay, it's quite important to make sure that everybody is muted when you talk. That'll really help, I think.
Yes.
can I,
Okay, then let's mute.
that might happen. Okay, let's start. I was talking about Brexit. Is that any better?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
At that time, the Leave campaign, funded by the right wing, brainwashed most of the electorate with propaganda of Britain will be a better place without EU, and it will have a sovereignty to deal with its own affairs. Now we know they were all lies, and UK citizens are paying dearly for the cost of living and other economic hardships. Let me move to Putin and the Ukraine. Let me make it clear, Putin's invasion of Ukraine and annexation of Crimea is inexcusable and a criminal act.
Brian Cooper, can you mute, please?
Okay.
Selena Garcia, can you mute, please? Fauzia Shaheen, can you mute, please?
Okay.
Well, I'm not making any noise. Not saying anything.
The problem is with Vijay's audio, it's the muting's not going to make a blind bit of difference.
I can hear you well, all of you. Okay. Let's
Carry on, Vijay.
yeah. Yeah. The point I was trying to make about Ukraine and was that the United States have been shelling and bombing in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Yemen, and now fighting a US NATO proxy war with Russia and Ukraine. But few people talk about it because the media is dominated by the US top media companies, and also the internet and social media, Google, Twitter, Facebook, and mostly American owned and controlled. It's a strange that the Ukraine war is continuing and killing people and destroying lives, and nobody is interested to either broker or do anything about peace. That is so strange. Let me move on to another false reporting of Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning. WikiLeaks leaked almost 500,000 incident report about the US invasion, about Iraq and Afghanistan, covering enemy engagements and body counts, a never-ending war full of lies and distortion of facts. And also it showed that Obama administration was as violent and secretive as the Bush administration. The release of the WikiLeaks broke a dam and era of secrets. The heroic work of Chelsea Manning and Julian Assange is a watershed moment in exposing the injustice and act of betrayal of the US government and its allies. The case of Julian Assange is most shocking. When Julian and WikiLeaks could win readers and prizes for The Guardian and the New York Times, they were highly celebrated. When the dark state objected and demanded the destruction of hard drives and assassination of Julian's character, he was made a public enemy #1. Vice President Biden called him a high-tech terrorist, and Hillary Clinton asked, "Can't we just drone this guy?" Point I'm making is that Julian is in prison and we should make all efforts to get him out of there. Now, let me move on to way forward and what we can do. Dear friends, when media abdicates its responsibility to tell the truth and only tell the public what its rulers or people who are financing it wants them to know, we in the peace movement, we as citizens have a duty to tell the truth. And I'd like to share some of the places where you can find the truth. And large number of media outlets exist on the internet who are telling the truth. And let me name a few. Consortium News, Grey Zone, Mint Press News, Declassified UK, Al Bold, Electronic Intifada, WSWS, ZNet, ICH, Counterpunch, Popular Resistance, TNS, Passenger, World Beyond War, and our own Uniting for Peace. The point I'm making is, as we stood up against fascism in the 1930s, we should stand up against these lies as writers, and as filmmakers, we should stand up as we stood against the Cold War in the 1940s. We need to stand up and be. Dear friends, I'm going to conclude now. Our struggle for collective peace and harmony must always reject fake news and fight militarism and ongoing wars, and target the military against destabilizing nations around the world. Its role in forcing other countries to enact free market policies that advocate low wages for the poor and stop developing nations from making any progress. The way forward is for USA and its allies to forge deep economic, cultural, and political ties with China and Russia to solve the urgent and grave problem the world is facing today. And as I have advocated all along, time and again, that a good solution is to establish Department or Ministry of Peace at cabinet level worldwide for dialogue, for negotiations, for conflict resolution, for diplomacy, and to resolve conflicts. Dear friends, all our efforts should be to work towards building a peaceful and prosperous world. Yes, another better world is possible. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to now invite Andre Ginstedt to speak. Andre is an author, sculptor, founder of COBLWU Institute, Germany. Please welcome Andre. The floor is for you, Andre. Start.
Thank you, Vijay, for the introduction. I'm happy to meet you. I'm today in Spain. For you to know, I've been working on the issue of narrative in Spain these days. I'm skilled in 5 languages. This is also the reason why I've been working as a silent diplomat. You will find, if you make a search, Andreu Ginastet, so my name, plus the word NATO, you will find pretty soon an official entry. It's one out of thousands. Yeah, I just want you to make it so that you can see what I mean. So it's Andreu Ginastet, I'll put it in the chat, and then you go NATO, and you have to find an entry in Google that starts with 4-point fraying arms controls. Arms control, and then arms control. Okay, so, and if you make that search, you will find one entry, okay, but there is thousands of them. And what do I want to tell you that? It's very simple, that as soon as, let's say, a glimpse of what reality is let's say, used by the established media, obviously it's done so omitting the entire context. So you have to know the entry you will find is one statement out of thousands, but you will never get the thousands. It's impossible. So the manipulation by media is also a huge setup of manipulation through, let's say, omission. Yeah? And this omission is a terrible thing, because we need to know all these things. Yeah, we need to know all the things which have been said in the past, so that we know. Somebody is talking in the background and has not a muted microphone. Could it be?
Carry on, Andre.
Yes. Okay, so the point is that these omissions are relevant because, for example, there has been a huge amount of discussion going on in the last years within NATO, within the UN, within the European Union, in all the institutions on all levels. It's been thousands of hours of talking, of doing work and doing good work. And nothing of it is allowed on the surface, nothing. It's just kept hidden. The official protocols, which are published, for example, by the ETH in Switzerland, in Zurich, they lie. They do not tell you the truth. Official version. But in the background, the discussion has gone much further. And we do not know why, if the discussion has gone so far, these people do not feel like they have to comply and adapt to progress. You know, there is a huge contradiction between what they could do and what they are doing. So the manipulation of narrative is even more evil, because they are much closer to our reality than we think. I've been discussing, for example, with weapon dealers within these circles, because, you know, I'm a silent diplomat. As a silent diplomat, I'm supposed to, for example, stop a war when there is a war declaration on the table. And this has happened several times. So we had, for example, 4 times the expressed intent of having a nuclear war in which I had to interfere and stop that process. And this happens off and on. It doesn't happen every 2 minutes, but it happens. So this is what a silent diplomat is doing. He goes into the negotiation and he waits until the moment has come where his arguments will be listened to, which is not something which happens fast. You know, you, for example, have to allow Americans and Europeans to tell their lies. And when they have finished, let's say they have discussed for 8 hours and the Russians still say, sorry, but this is no argument. We don't accept these excuses. These arguments are false. We don't believe, we don't buy into that. Then it's my turn to speak, which implies that, you know, we are sitting there for 8 hours and waiting. But it's, you know, we have a war declaration on the table. So the way narratives are framed, so for example, that the general public has absolutely no idea what happens in these circumstances, in these rooms, of what happens, what has been discussed previously before this circumstance arises, and how, you know, how much effort has been put into guiding, you know, huge amounts of people within these institutions in the right direction, offering them alternatives and solutions, which they you know, they're happy to have them. They use them, you know, because they don't want a nuclear war. Obviously, they don't want a nuclear war. So they're ready to listen to any argument that will help them out of that situation. But even though they know all this, and even though they have, you know, heard the terms, the new notions of what peace is and what peace could be, they still prefer and still go for the old-fashioned lifestyle, which is, let's hit, you know, let's set up a gang. We're gonna go around the corner and hit some weak guys we find, and then get some money out of them, which is what they do. You know, it's using the army as a hammer, seeing every problem as a nail. You know, and even the very scientific and very reputed, you know, authors like Stephen M. Walt publish books about it. They publish books in which they explain what is going on. And still these people prefer to not to listen. You know, you have, for example, Jeffrey Sachs talking off and on in the White House and talking off and on in, for example, the Congress, and explaining things in favor of peace. You know, I don't agree with Jeffrey Sachs on many issues, but he is still working a lot for peace. Yeah, and he's doing a huge effort. And doing this huge effort, Jeffrey Sachs is doing good. But even if he tells the truth within the Congress, it's one voice, and everybody will, you know, occasionally applaud, and everybody will listen to it, but it goes in there and out there. Why? Because business is what matters. And business is business as usual. So it's not only that they manipulate in an evil way, which is documented. You know, if you find this, right, Luke Addison, you put the right link in the chat. So thank you for that. If you go into the chat, Luke, and you find my entry is the 7th from the top. Yeah, you will find my entry as the 7th. And then you can do two things. You can click either on my name, or you can click on the document. If you click on my name, you will find at least, you know, a couple of dozens of entries, which gives you a little glimpse of what silent diplomacy really is. So you get, you know, just a glimpse. It's because you do not have it. It's a larger effort than to find all the context. Yeah, you have to do some digging, but you can do it. And this, by the way, was published last year in October 2021, because I was warned by German secret services, by police, and by French diplomats, and by Polish diplomats, and so on, by many, many, many people from many nations, you know, Estonian diplomats, I was warned that I would have to do silent diplomacy again, yeah, and mediate again in a war, yeah, which is, you know, something I didn't want to do. I don't want to do the mediation. I'm tired of it. To be honest, I'm more than tired of it. So I will go on doing the mediation. Why? Because these people seem to not to have finished discussing. It seems like, yes, they have been discussing now peace for 20 years, and probably they would like to go on discussing for the next 20 years while they are still selling the weapons, you know. But the point is, what I want to tell you is how mad this manipulation of media is, because this manipulation of media, this mass manipulation of concepts happens in the face of discussions about peace and disarmament, and in the face of discussions about weapons conversion and weapons industries conversion. They all know it. They all discuss it. You know, all the weapon manufacturers have, let's say, assets, and they have, let's say, different businesses in which they make a lot of money, and they make more money out of the civilian goods that they produce. They make more money out of that than out of the weapon sales, and they still do it. And this is something which is very intriguing, because, you know, all the narrative change, all the weaponry which is put into words is also part of it. And it all has to do with one single goal. All this manipulation of media. Obviously, in the first place, there is some weapons and some wars and some conflicts which are put in front of us. But these weapons, these conflicts which are put in front of us, they're used as a decoy, because what they are afraid of is of real democracy. They're afraid of us using our power to decide what must happen in a democracy. Like, for example, setting up a peace ministry. I've been discussing peace ministry ideas, for example, with the Minister of the Interior in Germany in 2014. He invited me to a private conversation about it. And he had read everything. He knew everything. But he said, Mr. Ginestead, are you really going to try? I mean, come on, you know, you can't do it. You cannot win. And I say, I cannot win. Why not? Why not? Who says that we cannot win? Obviously, we can win that battle. Obviously, we can do it. It's just that we do not have to run after the decoys. So, for example, we must change the narrative ourselves. And I'm doing a huge amount of publishing about how, with which technique, we can do the change of narrative.
Thank you. Thank you, Andy. Very inspiring. Our next speaker is Keith Best, a former member of UK Parliament and former chair of World Federalist Movement. Please welcome Keith Best. Keith Best, floor is yours, and nice to see you. You're muted. You're muted. Yeah, good. No, you're muted. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Well, Vijay, thank you for your warm welcome, and colleagues, it's very nice to be among you and to see everybody here. The ability of the peacemaker, which many would argue is also an obligation, is to take a disinterested view of history and view conflict from the perspective of all antagonists and not just a partisan approach. Because without that, it is impossible to see the flaws in the supposed resolution of war and discern the origins of the next outbreak in the peace treaty of the last. We assess that we live in troubled times, but seldom in history has there been the absence of that since the beginnings of humanity. periods of so-called peace have usually been those in which one nation or a group exerted domination over the rest, and on far too few occasions has the victor exhibited Winston Churchill's maxim, in war resolution, in defeat defiance, in victory magnanimity, and in peace goodwill. So it's in that spirit of disinterested observer that I assess what is happening in Ukraine and its causes. First, we must be clear, as Vijay pointed out in his preamble to this seminar this evening, that the invasion was a clear breach of international law, unprovoked, and certainly contrary to the new crime of aggression recently added to the panoply of the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. There is no doubt that war crimes and crimes against humanity have been perpetrated by Russian forces, and the evidence is being gathered for what may result in a separately constituted court similar to those for former Yugoslavia and Rwanda. Sadly, the raping and looting by Russian soldiers is reminiscent of their forebears' behavior when they entered Berlin in 1945. It is now clear from recent statements by Putin that the original stated war aims have been supplanted by the more honest one of seeking Ukrainian territory for its natural resources and as a buffer against NATO. Counterproductively, of course, Putin has now forced both Finland and Sweden into NATO, with Ukraine queuing up. Yet, what are the causes of this devastating war that is affecting so much of the world, pushing up prices and inflation, causing potential life-threatening famine in Africa and the Middle East, and causing countries to reverse their attempts to limit fossil fuels and reliance on Russia's oil and gas, apart from precipitating the potential for World War III through miscalculation by either Moscow or NATO? Well, I think we need to put ourselves into the mindset of the Russians, and considerable numbers of whom, of course, still back the war. First, although the Russians have been as equally guilty in their military interventions in Afghanistan and Syria, they will look at the two Gulf Wars as an unprovoked military action by the USA and its allies. Secondly, the Kremlin has never accepted Ukrainian independence in 1991 and still regards it as part of the former Russian Federation. Thirdly, from the viewpoint of Moscow, it does look as though it is being menacingly threatened by an encroaching NATO. From the Russian perspective, the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, glasnost, perestroika, were more accommodating to the West. Enlargement of the EU led to a sense of beleaguerment as well as loss of influence. Within 2 years of the fall of the Berlin Wall, the former territories of the Soviet Union, the 5 Central Asian countries, the so-called stans, had declared independence and become part of the Commonwealth of Independent States. They are now semi-autonomous, and of course, Uzbekistan now hosts a major American air base. As to NATO membership, the US Secretary of State James Baker stated on the 9th of February 1990 that the reunification of Germany would not lead to the enlargement of NATO's military organization to the east. And the following day, Helmut Kohl, the German Chancellor, said, "We consider that NATO should not enlarge its sphere of activity." It's true that in 1991-92, NATO had no intention of enlarging, and its statements to that effect to the Russians were accurate. But in 1999, Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic joined NATO, followed by Bulgaria, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Slovakia, and Slovenia in 2004, and then Albania and Croatia in 2009. So from Moscow, this looks like encirclement and deceit, giving rise to not trusting the West's intentions. Now, no one can predict how the conflict in Ukraine will end. If Russia suffers further reverses, it's interesting how even supporters of the war are pointing out the inadequacies of training, equipment, supplies, and manpower of the Russian forces. Then, of course, Putin may be replaced, but probably by Sergei Shoigu or a general equally, if not more, hard line. It is clear that the Ukrainians will accept nothing less than a total withdrawal of Russia from all its territory, including Crimea and what was seized in 2014. If the West continues to support that position, there is currently no basis for compromise or negotiation. If Ukraine prevails, however, Russia will be humiliated even further, and that will be a dangerous situation. A wounded beast is a dangerous animal. It is then, therefore, that the West must be conciliatory and hold out the hand of friendship and understanding, offering support, mutual trust, building measures such as observation of and even joint military exercises, recognizing that a defeated Russia is an even greater threat to peace. The West missed a trick in 1989 and 1990 when it should have been much more proactive in that way and must not make the same mistake again. Churchill's words will haunt us. Now, Maria Ressa, some of you will know, the 2021 Nobel Peace Prize laureate, claims that modern media have become obsessed with fear, hatred, and the baser instincts, rather than believing that there is good in the world. You have to draw the line between good and evil and have trust, despite attempts to destroy it, as well as faith. Her solution, long term, is education. Medium term, it is legislation. And short term, it is combat against the threat. Both her assessment and that of Freedom House make grim reading. She foresees 2024, with its numerous elections around the world, as marking democracy in further retreat, undermined by populism and the spreading of falsities, let alone the increasing predominance of defeated leaders to challenge the legitimacy of the democratic process itself. And she urges us to take action now. Well, democracy is a delicate flower and must be nurtured, as well as constantly revised to make sure that it is fit for modern purpose. Freedom House's latest democracy index, which rates people's access to political rights and civil liberties in 210 countries and territories, states, and I quote, "Global freedom faces a dire threat. Around the world, the enemies of liberal democracy, a form of self-government in which human rights are recognized and every individual is entitled to equal treatment under the law, are accelerating their attacks. Authoritarian regimes have become more effective at co-opting or circumventing the norms and institutions meant to support basic liberties, and at providing aid to others who wish to do the same. In countries with long-established democracies, internal forces have exploited the shortcomings in their systems, distorting national politics to promote hatred, violence, and unbridled power. Those countries that have struggled in the space between democracy and authoritarianism, meanwhile, are increasingly tilting towards the latter. The global order is nearing a tipping point, and if democracy's defenders do not work together to help guarantee freedom for all people, the authoritarian model will prevail. The present threat to democracy is the product of 16 consecutive years of declining global freedom. A total of 60 countries suffered declines over the last year, while only 25 improved. And as of today, some 38% of the global population live in not free countries, the highest proportion since 1997. Only about 20% now live in what can be described as free countries. Now, some autocracies can last for a long time, the Tsarist regime and Stalin's domination, for example, but they usually have within them the seeds of their own destruction. We are seeing remarkable cracks in Xi Jinping's iron rule in China, with spontaneous demonstrations in several cities against his COVID lockdown policy. That is significant in a country with no culture or history of democracy, and yet the people have a voice, even displaying blank placards in protest at the suppression of that voice. Now, I'm not suggesting a Chinese spring, but we should not forget Tiananmen Square. Likewise, as I've indicated, Having seen perestroika and glasnost once, we cannot predict it will not happen again in Russia. The events of 1989 were largely entirely unforeseen. And when I was in Moscow only a few years earlier, the edifice of Soviet communism seemed intact. I'm currently reading the forgotten and only recently resurrected manuscript of a book by Brendan Sewell, whom some of you may have heard of or know, called The Armed Dove, in which he postulates a new world order with the creation of a world peace authority, which would oversee general nuclear disarmament. It's rather similar, Vijay, to your ideas of peace ministries. I hope that that book will soon see the light of day, as it is an interesting premise and a useful recount of actual history, going back to for example, the McCloy-Zorin proposals for disarmament generally of 1961. He goes back even further. Lord Salisbury, the British Prime Minister, in a speech in 1897, saw the piling up of arms and the yearly improvement in the instruments of death, culminating in a terrible effort of mutual destruction, which will be fatal for Christian civilization. Interestingly, he went on to suggest that the only way disaster could be avoided would be eventually by bringing the powers together to be welded in some international constitution. Similarly, Sir Edward Grey, later Lord Grey, British Foreign Secretary from 1905 to 1916, attributed the First World War to the same cause. Great armaments lead inevitably to war. The increase of armaments produces a consciousness of the strength of other nations and a sense of fear. Fear begets suspicion and distrust and evil imaginings of all sorts, till each government feels it would be criminal and a betrayal of its country not to take every precaution, while every government regards the precautions of every other government as evidence of hostile intent. Olof Palme, for example, in his independent commission report, and I quote, "No matter what unilateral choices a nation makes in pursuit of security, it will remain vulnerable to nuclear attack and thus ultimately insecure. Neither physical nor psychological security can be achieved without the development of an international system that could outlaw war. As long as a community of nations lacks a structure of laws backed by a central authority with power and legitimacy to enforce these laws, then nations are likely to continue to arm." So, the answer to ameliorating the dangers of this world, which have been with us, as I pointed out, for centuries in different forms, has always been clear. It is to bring all the nations together in a concerted effort to turn swords into plowshares and to seek general disarmament, starting with nuclear arsenals, which by now almost certainly are otiose and have lost any significant purpose. Yet that goal can only be achieved in a climate of trust and cooperation. And for me, it is that for which we must now strive. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you so much, Kate, for stating the path very clearly, the causes and solutions for it. So thank you very much. Our next speaker today is Reverend Brian Cooper, who is Vice President and Interfaith Secretary of Uniting for Peace. Friends, please welcome Brian Cooper.
Thank you, Vijay. Challenging false mainstream narratives. Although we live in a society where a plurality of views is allowed and often expressed, surprisingly, very often a dominant narrative emerges to virtually exclude other opinions and viewpoints. Sometimes this is blatantly created by certain sections of the media representing strong political interests. The demonization of Jeremy Corbyn MP, former Labour leader, especially after his unexpected success in the 2017 election, depriving Prime Minister May of her majority in Parliament, is a case in point. Almost overnight, Jeremy Corbyn was embroiled in a very damaging controversy over anti-Semitism. Now, those, including many taking part this evening, I think, who followed his campaign over the years against all forms of discrimination, found this incredible. Yet a major narrative emerged, pushed by sections of the press, that Corbyn was a closet anti-Semite. It isn't easy to discuss this without being oneself accused of anti-Semitism. But obviously, Israel was not happy that Labour should be led by someone dedicated to the cause of the Palestinians. And Israel would welcome any moves to oust him or to impede his success at the polls. For him to be accused of anti-Semitism was, to say the least, very convenient. And he certainly contributed to his defeat at the 2019 election. Did the UK supporters of Israel help to mobilise the anti-Corbyn campaign? Certain Jewish organisations did so, made no secret of it, although the main threat to Corbyn came from the anti-left within Labour. A dominant narrative against Corbyn was established and proved impossible to shift. The Russia-Ukraine war is another example. The narrative is Russia and Putin wholly in the wrong, Ukraine, Zelensky wholly in the right. Yet although Russia's invasion stands condemned under international law, international crises are never so simple, and this one is certainly not. But any hint of complexity or nuance is dismissed. We must all rally behind Ukraine, we are told. But the threat of Russia of Ukraine joining NATO and having its nuclear weapons only a few hundred miles from Moscow was very real. It was encouraged by Zelensky's wild talk. In the context of NATO's relentless eastward expansion, it was doubly alarming to Moscow. But the media have established a dominant narrative, which is very hard to challenge. It's also revealing that Zelensky, a trained actor, does not attend in-person international forums, does all his speeches by Skype from scripts. There is a tendency at the moment to ascribe all kinds of ill to the Ukraine war. I find it hard to see how the United Kingdom's current cost of living crisis is caused by the Ukraine war, thought more by bad political choices. And it's very, very convenient for politicians to be able to attribute to the Ukraine war the problem which they themselves have caused. Another dominant narrative, which has to be challenged, is that China threatens the West. This has emerged in recent years. Jerry referred to it. It's only a decade ago since George Osborne preached the new golden age of trade and contacts with China. The West has benefited over decades greatly from cheaply produced Chinese products. But once the USA realized its global economic dominance was seriously challenged by the rise of China's economy, and once China began to acquire military strength as well, the image was turned negative. Just because USA was challenged, we were all deemed to be under threat. No one asks, why should China want to scare and alienate its best customers? China's rise challenges US ascendancy. That doesn't make it a threat to European states. It's not to say that we approve of the Chinese regime. We would not wish to live there currently. There is mass surveillance, and it's a totalitarian state. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's a threat to ourselves. Dominant narratives created by governments and media are a dangerous form of mass manipulation and brainwashing to support and advance sexual interest. They should be challenged by all means possible, and certainly by the peace movement. These false narratives create fear and division. The peace movement must replace them with positive narratives that create hope. I would suggest these positive narratives need to focus on the climate change crisis, world poverty and inequality, and hunger in several countries. The current narratives are false, divisive, and create fear. They must be relentlessly opposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Just to remind all the speakers, please send your speech either to me or to Brian Cooper, because we are putting a report of this meeting in our next newsletter of Uniting for Peace. Please send all your speeches to me or to Brian Cooper. Okay, thanks, Brian. And the next speaker is Bernie Holland, who is a Uniting for Peace committee member and also of Soka Gakkai International. Please welcome Bernie Holland. Bernie, floor is yours.
Thank you, Vijay. Thank you for inviting me to this important conference, and it's very nice to be with you all. I'll just say before I read my prepared statement that it's going to be very clear how polarized the views are when you hear what I'm going to say. So I'm going to commence by quoting part of the introductory comment. Why is world peace in peril? We live in an age of misinformation, rhetoric, and propaganda. The brainwashing is so thorough that Western societies are programmed to swallow a pack of lies. If we do not recognize propaganda, we may accept it as normal and believe in it. That's how submissive we have become. And Putin's invasion of Ukraine and the annexation of Crimea is an inexcusable and criminal act. It's a crime to invade a sovereign country, unquote. I cannot let this condemnation of Putin and Russia go unquestioned. Of course, it is not for me to decide what views should be held by others. Nevertheless, to borrow your words here, we live in an age of misinformation, rhetoric, and propaganda. This applies as much to the narratives that are perpetuated within the peace movement as it does to the state-controlled media that we claim to be pushing back against. Words have power. The choice of words matters with regards to the narratives we employ in our efforts to influence others, and they can have serious consequences. A good example of the power of words and framing the narrative pertains to the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. The official establishment narrative invariably frames it as, quote, a war of aggression, a criminal invasion of Ukraine by Russia, while others prefer to call it a special military operation. These are clearly two parallel universes of the same theatre of conflict, each following, willingly or unwillingly, the way it is to be portrayed to a public which is largely ignorant of the historical context underlying this tragic and quite unnecessary conflict, a context which is ably provided by commentators such as John Mearsheimer and Professor Richard Sakwa, both of whom have been decried as peddlers of the false narratives we are discussing here regarding the actions that Russia have undertaken after many decades of baiting and provocation by the West. The binary of us and them has long permeated mainstream reporting of conflicts and war. The news media, serving the triumvirate of Washington, the City of London, and Brussels, routinely reproduce official perception of the conflicts as an invasion by Russia and a war, while others, in accord with the Russian Federation and its political allies of Eurasia, Africa, and the Global South, prefer to accept it in terms of a special military operation. As in most cases, alternative perspectives are lost in such official-driven narratives, which leads to partial knowledge and understanding of factors involved, and then goes on to influence action at the level of the individual or the state. And before we realize that we are being blindly driven into acquiescence, I will give an example here. The Bureau of Global Public Affairs, a think tank of the US State Department, has published a website with the link storiesstate.gov, which presents a series of highly emotive images taken in Ukraine since the 24th of February, when the Russian military entered the Donbas oblasts of Luhansk and Donetsk. What is removed from the narrative here is the fact that these republics, which voted to be part of the Russian Federation, have undergone shelling and bombing by the Ukrainian military ever since the US staged the coup of 2014. This event and the history leading up to it has been vividly and accurately portrayed in the acclaimed documentary by Oliver Stone and Igor Lopotonok, Ukraine on Fire, which under the pretext of being misinformation has been banned from mainstream outlets. However, it is still available for viewing on independent media outlets. The Bureau of Global Public Affairs, which is associated with the Atlantic Council, a NATO think tank wholly dedicated to the vilification of the Russian Federation and the villainization of President Putin, asserts that statements such as, quote, Moscow has had no plans for an occupation of Ukrainian territories, quote, the sole purpose is the country's demilitarization and denazification, quote, the focus is upon attacking military infrastructures, and quote, the civilian population is not being targeted, are nothing but a pack of lies. Therefore, this US-based think tank would itself support this claim that Putin's invasion of Ukraine and annexation of Crimea is inexcusable and a criminal act. It's a crime to invade a sovereign country. However, this is an imperialist narrative and ignores the provisions of United Nations Charter Article 51, which allows military operations undertaken in self-defense, namely that of the Russian-speaking Ukrainians of the Donbass, over 12,000 of whom have been slaughtered at the hands of ultra-national militants embedded within the Ukrainian military. Documentary proof of this is available in the film of the Odessa massacre of March 2014, which again has been banned by the censors of the corporate-controlled Western media. I would like to emphasize here that the neo-fascist aspect has been systematically erased from the official narrative. Worse still, it has been normalized, as is evident by a delegation of the Azov battalion that was entertained to a state reception in Washington at the end of September. I have been provided with photographic evidence of this, and it has now become so brazen that it almost beggars belief. With regard to this topic of disinformation, the US State Department has recently funded an official Ukrainian government website for countering disinformation, which lists a large number of individuals who have been designated as, quote, information terrorists, simply because they present alternative perspectives regarding the war in Ukraine. Several have already been assassinated, including Daria Dugina, the daughter of a prominent Russian nationalist who was killed in a car bomb explosion in Moscow in August this year. It is hardly surprising that Ukraine denied any involvement in the attack. Others on the Ukrainian kill list include prominent peace activists such as Scott Ritter, Chris Hedges, Ray McGovern, Roger Waters, and Helga Zepp-LaRouche, president of the Schiller Institute, a German-based think tank dedicated to the establishment of a Eurasian security architecture involving the BRICS Alliance, ASEAN, the Association of East Asian Nations, SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and CELAC, the Community of Latin American Countries. Global NATO, as it is now called, is working to undermine and destroy this Eurasian alliance under the pretext of maintaining an, quote, international rules-based order. This is a complete fraud, as the global majority, namely those within the ever-expanding Eurasian alliance, totally reject these rules, which the USA, NATO, and the European G7 group impose arbitrarily upon others, but fail to observe themselves. They present this canard of Western democracy versus Sino-Russian autocracy within their so-called rules-based international order at a time when a law-based international order is being developed by those involved in the Silk Road economic belt. Meanwhile, anyone who refuses to join the West in the economic war being waged upon both Russia and China is subjected to the usual treatment of sanctions, and even more sanctions. And of course, there is the issue of the sabotage of the gas pipelines in the Baltic Sea, which predictably is being blamed on Russia. I would now like to return to this assertion made in the introduction that Putin's invasion of Ukraine and annexation of Crimea is inexcusable and a criminal act. It's a crime to invade a sovereign country. There are many within this anti-imperial movement who subscribe to this opinion, including Chris Hedges, Noam Chomsky, and Jeremy Corbyn. However, whilst I cannot claim to share the celebrity of such figures, there are many who share my view that to brand Putin as an evil dictator who should be brought to trial for war crimes is entirely spurious when one examines the history of all this. I've attempted to argue this point at previous conferences organised by Uniting for Peace. Furthermore, a few months ago, I was actually removed from an online rally organised on Zoom by an American peace organisation by the name of Code Pink for questioning this narrative regarding Vladimir Putin. I posted a dissenting comment in the chat for that event, only to see the screen go blank with the message, "The host has removed you from the meeting." So much for these people who harp on about freedom of speech and the injustices perpetrated against Daniel Hale, Chelsea Manning, and Julian Assange. This statement, "It's a crime to invade a sovereign country," cannot go unchallenged when one considers that the sovereignty of Ukraine was surrendered after the coup of 2014, when it gradually morphed into a de facto colony of USA and NATO. Going back to 1991, when Ukraine gained its so-called independence on the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the most profitable industrial companies were snapped up by European and US investors who bled the country dry, leaving it an empty shell of corruption, deindustrialization, and economic decline. Immediately after the coup in 2015, along with the outbreak of the civil war against the Donbass, the remainder was carved up into various sectors during an orgy of privatization. And of course, there was the bailout of the banks by the International Monetary Fund and the scandal associated with that, all in all leaving Ukraine as an economic and industrial basket case. In fact, some years earlier, Putin had offered to resuscitate the economy with generous loans, but the West had different ideas, intent on pushing Ukraine into an alliance with an already fracturing European Union. This is documented in detail by Richard Sakwa in his book, Frontline Ukraine, who quotes a part of a speech delivered by Putin, who in addressing the Russian Security Council in 2014 stated clearly, quote, "Today we hear of ultimatums and sanctions. The very notion of state sovereignty is being washed out. Undesirable regimes, countries that conduct an independent policy or simply stand in the way of someone else's interests get destabilized. Tools used for this purpose are the so-called color revolutions, or in simple terms, takeovers instigated and financed from outside. Furthermore, regarding these claims of Russian aggression, one has to again to revisit the events of the 2014 Maidan coup and Sakwa's observation of Putin's view towards Ukraine, where people came to power through the use of armed force and by unconstitutional means. Again, he quotes from Putin's speech, quote, "For some strange reason, power ended up in the hands of those who either funded or carried out this takeover. Meanwhile, without any attempt at negotiation, they are trying to suppress by force that part of the population that does not agree with such a turn of events. At the same time, they present Russia with an ultimatum. Either you let us destroy the part of the population that is ethnically, culturally, and historically close to Russia, or we introduce sanctions against you. This is a strange logic and absolutely unacceptable, of course. And of course, all of this history has been whitewashed out from the Western media accounts. It is not so much disinformation, but more the case that the information is redacted. It is an error of omission. And when one attempts to remedy this faulty account, the usual methods of censorship are applied, along with the perpetuation of these entirely spurious claims that Russia has violated the sovereignty of others, when the exact opposite is true. And so black becomes white, up becomes down, and the topsy-turvy reality of the hegemonic worldview is exposed. I would like, in relation to this, I would like to draw your attention to a passage from the book, The Trial of Julian Assange by Niels Meltzer, who writes, quote, "In terms of purpose, the public mistreatment of Assange is not about forcing a confession or otherwise coercing him to cooperate, but primarily serves to intimidate and deter other publishers, journalists, and whistleblowers who might be tempted to follow his example. In the absence of any evidence for a prosecutable crime, Assange's persecution also aims to punish him arbitrarily through intimidation, isolation, humiliation, and endless proceedings for having publicized the dirty secrets of the powerful. The public mobbing of defenseless individuals is one of the most primitive forms of social communication. Deeply rooted in the human subconscious since the dawn of history, it is a demonstration of power that requires no explanation and generally triggers the instinctive behavioral patterns of self-protection, conformity, and complicity. from the popular condemnation of Jesus Christ to the European witch trials of the 17th century and the political show trials of all the dictatorships and sham democracies in human history, state-sanctioned mobbing has been one of the most effective methods of controlling public opinion and silencing inconvenient dissent. I feel there is a resonance regarding Meltzer's observation here with the way that the nation of Russia is being treated by the West. With respect to the obsession for the containment of Russia, the relentless move towards intimidation, isolation, humiliation, and endless sanctions have been instrumental in the baiting and provocation that, having forged an existential crisis in terms of the sovereignty of the mother country, has forced Putin's hand here. And in regard the mobbing of the supine acquiescence of the US within the European Union, which continues along the path to economic suicide, its media outlets continuing their efforts to control public opinion and silence inconvenient dissent. We must not become complicit in this by falling for the deceptions being played out by our media regarding what is now becoming a direct conflict between Russia and NATO. And with respect to this development, it's entirely fraudulent to make the claim that Putin has been threatening everyone and anyone with nuclear weapons. Quite the opposite, when it is the West that keeps ramping up this narrative. For it was Biden who stoked fears about Armageddon, and it was the hapless and vacuous Liz Truss who boasted that she would be quite prepared to press the button. Again and again, Russia is painted as the aggressor, while the continued provocation and escalation by the West is conveniently ignored. The Western media is in overdrive in its attempt to portray NATO as a defense alliance, when its actions over the last 30 years are placed under scrutiny. And in light of Articles 9 and 10 of the Nuremberg Statute of August 1945, it qualifies as a criminal organization. The international community that NATO speaks of is merely a coalition based around the triumvirate of Washington, City of London, and Brussels, and the global majority are sick and tired of its rules-based order. In 1961, in his farewell speech, President Eisenhower introduced a new phrase, the military-industrial complex, and warned how, if left unchecked, could bring serious problems in the future. And now, with the passage of some 60 years, his warning has been left unheeded, as it has now developed into the military, industrial, congressional, intelligence, media, academic, think tank complex, which goes under the acronym Mickey Mat, coined by ex-CIA analyst and now peace activist Ray McGovern. I did invite Ray to this meeting, but he couldn't come. But now I'm nearly finished. The narratives pertaining to geopolitical issues are formulated in the various think tanks, which are then fed to the intelligence and security agencies. And from there, they are passed on to the print media and primetime TV channels for the purpose of keeping their audience in a propaganda-induced coma. By maintaining an ill-informed and credulous audience, the ruling factions of a corrupt establishment can virtually say anything they want and do anything they want with impunity. Congress is held hostage by the arms industry, and the Federal Reserve continues to be looted to the tune of billions of dollars in support of the corrupt regime of Zelensky. Likewise, the United Kingdom is complicit in all this mischief, informing its citizens that great sacrifices will have to be made in order to overthrow Putin and destroy Russia. So what do we do about all this? We cannot continue to allow ourselves to be lied to by the likes of the BBC with reporters such as John Simpson, Clive Myrie, Laura Koenigsberg, and others drip feeding us a narrative designed to persuade us that Ukraine is actually winning this war, when more reliable observers such as Jeffrey Sachs, Alexander Mercouris, Doug McGregor, Scott Ritter, and Ray McGovern offer a much wider perspective which plumbs the history of this in more breadth and depth and points towards the only solution, which is an armistice, followed by a proper negotiation and implementation of the Minsk agreement. I will conclude by saying that only by seeking independent sources of information, for the most part accessible through alternative outlets, for example, Rumble, or through online interviews and discussions, such as the Grey Zone and Crosstalk, can one gradually unravel this tapestry of dissemblance and deceit, and thus find out what is actually going on, and thus discover what those in power don't want us to hear or see. In the meantime, Julian Assange remains incarcerated at His Majesty's pleasure and at the hands of his cronies. Now, before I stop here, would someone please tell me exactly what is inexcusable and who are they that should be branded as criminals? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Barney. And I think
Beautiful.
there'll be lots to discuss once we open up the floor. Our last speaker for today is Luke Addison. He is Uniting for Peace executive member, a member of Peace Jam International, and he is our youngest member and youngest in this audience today. Luke, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, VJ. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Super. I will have to share my screen at some point, so if you can make me a co-host in the next couple of minutes, that would be great. So thank you so much, VJ, everyone within Uniting for Peace, our amazing previous, yes? Can you hear me? Did
Yes,
someone
yes.
shout Luke?
Yes, we can hear you.
Cool. I thought someone shouted Luke, but I'll, I'll keep going. So,
Very good now.
perfect. So thank you to the brilliant previous speakers and to everyone listening today. My name is Luke Addison. I am a 30-year-old drama, English and peace education teacher from Woking. Alongside my role with Uniting for Peace, I work closely with an organization called Peace Jam, a peace education organization that works with Nobel Peace Laureates and young people. I'm a member of Winchester Rotary Club. I engage regularly in volunteering and activism. And I also work closely with the World Summit of Nobel Peace Laureates. And I'll be sharing specifically some of this work with you today in the talk. As VJ mentioned, I've been a member of Uniting for Peace for many, many years, and I value my role within the organization a lot, and the fantastic work that VJ and our whole committee does. It's a real honor to be given the platform today to talk about world peace in peril, challenging false narratives, especially alongside some very established and brilliant speakers. I was asked to speak specifically on the youth perspective of the issues. I think that's given that I'm only very slightly younger than the rest of the panel here. When I hear the words challenging false narratives, there are two key areas that come to mind for me, media bias and freedom of the press. I think that they're both synonymously linked to the issue of false narratives and are both very important in finding solutions around them. Of course, media bias and freedom of the press and how you understand these terms and your relationship to them will mean very different things to everyone in this session, depending on your upbringing, political views, your job, your social background, and of course, the country that you live in. I certainly have my own views on all of these, but I thought that today, instead of attempting to be a spokesperson for all youth, I thought I'd do it a little bit differently and talk to you about a really brilliant global project and case study that I actually worked on earlier this year with young people from all around the world to show a few of their views and our findings so that you can get a unique perspective on some of these issues from young people worldwide. So the project was part of an initiative through the World Summit of Nobel Peace Laureates. And the project was called Press Freedom, Case Studies from Around the World. It was an incredibly important subject and still is, given the events of last year and especially right now. So we connected with students of journalism from all around the globe and asked them to look deeply into the situation of press freedom and media bias in their respective countries and regions. In the end, we chose to share the case studies of students within universities in Mexico, South Africa and India, but there were plenty more countries that took part and plenty more, oh, someone's phone's ringing, and plenty more students that took place as well. We held a session which involved these students reporting back to us on their findings. We held a Q&A session, but we also used 30 to 40 minutes of the session to specifically talk about solutions so that it wasn't just a session of speakers and then a short ending Q&A. The format given to each team was as follows. The study Case studies will be based on a survey that each team will conduct with at least 100 young people, taking into consideration a fair balance of age, gender, and race. Each team will do their own research of facts and events where mainstream media and online media have played a major role or have failed to play a moderate role in conveying the truth. The format was choosing their targeted country, listing mainstream media and alternative media in the studies, conducting a survey, which included questions such as what forms of mass media do you trust the most? Newspapers, TV, internet, why? Is it difficult to find unbiased information? If yes, why? In the past 5 years, has mass media played a positive or negative role in your social and personal development? There's about 10 more questions as well in that survey that I'm happy to share with you if you're interested. They then had to put their information into a short report, add their own facts and various events that are relevant, and then they submitted the report in a short video of around 2 minutes. So that was the study, and I'm going to just share a couple of minutes from each of the 3 reports, just so you can get a general idea of what we discussed. And then hopefully if there's a bit of time, I'm going to share one of the solutions that we looked at. So just bear with me. Oh, if you can just make me the co-host again, VJ, just so I can share my screen.
All right. Yeah, I've done it.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so first of all, this was from the young students from Mexico. So I'll just play a couple of minutes from this. Make sure can you hear this? Can you hear that? Okay.
No.
Yes. No.
Yeah. Okay. Let me just turn it up. Right.
I can't hear it, Luke.
You
No,
can't
we
hear.
can't hear it.
Let
We
me
can't
just.
hear it.
Oh, here we are. You should be able to hear it now. As I check the box for sound. So let me just check.
To speak on behalf of the Universidad
Yes, we can hear that. Yeah, great.
Perfect. Okay, here we go.
And also representing Mexico. I don't know if my classmate Moy, can you?
Oh, there we are.
Okay, there is. Okay, great. Okay, thank you. Now, after we made our research, we find out several things. First, organized crime and corruption in Mexico have led the country to a state of insecurity and injustice at critical levels. In this context, Mexico's journalists constantly face censorship, threats, and physical attacks when reporting dangerous subjects, such as drug trafficking and political matters. We knew right away that Mexico's journalist condition is critical and urgent, and that was going to be like one of our main topics for research. Our citizens are well aware of this problem. We carry out more than 170 surveys and in our research, and we collected the following results. 56% of those surveyed consider that in general terms that there is freedom of speech in Mexico, which is just a little bit more than half. There's a lot of people that don't believe that there's freedom of speech. 86% agreed that there are topics in Mexico which they will be afraid to speak about in public forums, such as drug trafficking and corruption in Mexican government and so on. So even though a lot of people consider that there's freedom of speech, they are afraid of speaking.
Okay, so a quick snapshot from Mexico. We're now going to travel to the other side of the globe, to South Africa.
Our former President Nelson Mandela said a critical, independent, and investigative press is the lifeblood of any democracy. And as our Mexican colleagues said previously, for democracy to flourish, we need an investigative press, we need an independent press, and we need a press to be able to say the truth without bias or being afraid of the government. So during my study, I found that the South African mass media has long been criticized for being biased and sensationalist. Out of the 97 South Africans that I did talk to during the survey process, a lot of them have a very great distrust of South African news, especially of the South African Broadcasting Commission, which is the South African broadcaster. And there's a big feeling as though the mainstream media in South Africa is controlled by political or financial influences.
Okay, so a little bit of a theme emerging, unfortunately, from Mexico over to South Africa. And then finally, this was a couple of minutes from the India team.
Namaste. India, a country known for its varied culture, languages, and rich heritage, envisages in its constitution a rather indirect approach towards freedom of press. The true nature of a democracy can be only known when its people and their inherent right to freely express their views and ideologies is accepted without much hindrance. The fundamental right of freedom of expression under Article 19, enshrined in the Constitution of India, encompasses the freedom of press. The nation has been predominantly influenced by mainstream media ever since the launch of the first newspaper, the Bengal Gazette, in 1780. India is slowly adapting to the wave of digital media with a rapid increase in internet usage and social media ascendancy. A recent survey on freedom of press shows that India is ranked 142nd in the World Press Freedom Index 2021.
Right, so India was ranked 142nd in the worldwide press freedom of the press index, which is a bit worrying for everyone in India. I know these are very, very quick, but I'll share the video for the larger session. And now, just in my final few minutes, I'm just going to share a little bit that we put together about the solutions. So, seeing these three countries are not doing very well for media bias and freedom of the press, here is one solution that we found to try and solve this. So here we are.
An initiative that's called Forbidden Stories. And this organization, essentially, when we go to About Us, they have a very interesting strapline, which is very much related to what we've been talking about. Killing the journalist won't kill the story. Essentially, they're a team of international journalists whose mission is to protect, pursue, and publish the work of journalists that face threat, prison, and murder. A big part of the organization was founded after the murder of a Maltese journalist called Daphne Caruana Galizia. You may have heard the international story on that. And they've got a great kind of infograph map here of all the work that they're currently pursuing through documentaries, through just getting the stories out. And you can see, just in terms of the question on solutions, this certainly doesn't fix the problem of a institutionalized sort of anti-truth government that's going to kill the journalists, but this certainly does offer some kind of international solution if you're based in India or Tanzania or Ghana, Morocco, Mexico, Guatemala, Ecuador, or Malta, and you're a journalist and something does happen to you, there is this network that's basically operating to get your story out.
Super, and I'll stop it there. So thank you so much for listening to me and letting me do something a little bit different. I will share with you in the comment section now the link to that whole session. It is about an hour and a half, so you do need to put aside a couple of hours to take it all in. But I was really involved in putting it together and moderating the session and being part of it. So if you do have any questions at all about it, or you want to share some of your work, please do get in touch. And just finally, a couple of closing sentences is we can see there, just, you know, from young people in just three countries, Mexico, India, and South Africa, that this problem is not one that is, you know, just for is just affecting the UK. It looks like young people from all across the world are feeling the same pain, the same kind of disillusionment with government, with media, with everything in between. And we managed to kind of scratch the surface with a little bit of a solution. As I said, it doesn't solve the problem, but it's certainly a step towards it. And I look forward to a really interesting discussion now on some of our solutions, so I can report back to our group. So thank you so much for letting me be part of this discussion. I'm more than happy to tell you more about our project as well, and looking forward to the rest of the discussion today. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Leo. And thank you all the speakers for this fascinating journey of media deception, media distortion of facts and information. Now, this is for all of you. The floor is open, and who is going to start the conversation? Or especially the people who haven't spoken as yet, the audience. Who is going to start? Norbert, you going to start?
Yes, I keep it brief. If you have watched the chat, you probably saw some of my comments. I'm a physician from Germany living in Austria. I created 25 years ago a website now called Better World Info, which hosts about 450,000 links and counting. Many topics we talked about today, you can find material, and I really want to encourage you to use it and share it. I think it's heavily underused by the peace movement, and especially when we talk about misinformation and how to challenge false narratives. We all need information, and we need input from all the experts there are, rather than just single votes every now and then. So it's good to have a platform. It's good to have many platforms, actually. And I really encourage you to use it, to help improve it, and especially share it. Thank you.
Thank you, Norbert. Paul Mallet, would you like to have a comment or a question? No, I can't get it.
I didn't, I'm here. I didn't put my hand up, but if you wish, I can make a comment.
I'm just provoking people to start talking.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll say something then. Basically, I've listened to this with great interest, and I come at this from the perspective of a peace professional working in the field. And when I hear anything like this, I from both ends, and we've heard a variety of opinions here, I always put it against the criteria of how will this lead to peace? You know, and the issue is the language. How does this language lead to peace? Given that you've said words have power, and I totally agree with that. And this leads us, of course, to the issue of truth. And the issue of truth, to me, is grounded in Gandhi's term Satya, which means truth force. In other words, truth has a power also. Words have power, but so does truth. No matter how the words may validate something or corrupt something or misinformation or anything like that. So there is a touchstone there with truth. And I think, you know, somebody once said that language is probably the worst form of communication that you can possibly have. We have to trust in certain things. If we're going to trust that truth is there, we also have to trust that people have some discretion about it. I would say you have to listen to the nonverbals. In other words, somebody is going to say something one way or the other, and pay attention to the fact that there's a truth there, and what is being said either feels right or doesn't feel right, and then we can validate it against our own critical reasoning and our own lived experience, and we can reject it and vote otherwise, or we can hold it in suspension until it's either validated or not. So I guess the big perspective that I would give is that if we are going to be a movement or a peace movement, that nonviolent communication is the #1 touchstone that we should probably talk about. And given that truth is something that's, say, fixed in some place, it's very, very clear today that we see all sorts of different interpretations of it. And so once we stray into the area of confirmation bias, things like this, we have to be very aware. And it certainly is going to come down to our capacity for critical reasoning. So that's what I would offer.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, you're very right. Truth will set you free, as they say. Okay, Anthony, would you like to come in? Say a few words?
Yes, but Andrew's actually, have you not seen his hand? It's been up for some time now.
Sorry, where is Andrew?
After Andrew.
Okay, okay, after Andrew. Andrew.
Okay, thank you. I just, would like to, because we've been discussing the issue of the priorities of how the lies, the decoys are being set to divert our attention. Just would like to point one little item, which is that we must understand that the conflict with Russia, the conflict with Ukraine is put in front of us because there is a larger conflict in the planning, in the making, which is the conflict with China. Yeah? So it's all diverting attention. All this media fuss is very much designed. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Anthony, your turn.
Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can, yeah.
I just want to thank everyone for some really interesting points. The speakers spoke very well, and it's good to be with you. What Paul just said about non-violent communication, in a way, echoed something that Keith Best said, which made me think, which was this idea that peacekeepers need to be non-partisan. And it's quite difficult for us to be non-partisan in a way, because it's very easy, to see. I mean, I constantly attack the United States because I always, of many years, felt that they were in such a position of dominance. But then, of course, you can be led down a partisan route. And I just feel personally it has never been more important for us to try and be non-partisan and see ourselves as adults in the room, if you like, and that it's not a football match. I know there's one going on at the moment, but it is not a football match. It's not a question of supporting one side or the other. I'm for Ukraine. It's not. It's applying international law. And of course, where there isn't any, it's got to be about trying to get that international law in place. Not only that it's clear, which I think it is fairly clear, but it is actually independently adjudicated. And for me, that's the most important thing. So I personally try really hard to remain in the middle path. And so what Paul and Keith were saying rang true for me. But I just want to say that I do think things like the doomsday clock is just one of many, many indicators that say that we are in a very, very dangerous position at the moment. And I have never been so terrified in my entire life. Okay. But thank you all.
Thanks, Anthony. Keith, would you like
Yeah.
Keith, would you like to respond?
Well, yes, thank you very much. And thank you, Anthony, for your kind and measured words. I'm a lawyer by profession, and one of the things you learn professionally, apart from actually being good sense, is to always play the devil's advocate, because you never know the strengths or weaknesses of your opponent's case until you put yourself in that person's position. And it's a very good discipline, because it does actually make you understand where people are coming from. And what I try to do in my few remarks is to put it very much from the Russian perspective, which I think escapes a lot of commentators in the West. Now, that doesn't alter, as you rightly say, where there is a clear breach of international law, then people who breach that law must be held to account. We are looking now not just at treaties and laws that are devised by one part of the world, but we are also looking very largely now at customary law, where many of these things have actually come into effect by universal consent, whether people have actually signed a treaty or not. So I think it really is important, because without understanding where the other person is coming from, there is no way you can actually build a bridge. there is no way you can actually find any common ground whatsoever. And the sad thing is, at the moment, we're just, there is no common ground, but we've actually got to look for it. And I thought it was rather interesting, the comments that Paul made about looking at some of the things like climate change and environmental issues and global poverty and things like this, where actually there is less of a partisan political clear divide between East and West, where there can be much more of a meeting of minds. And I think, what we've seen at COP26 particularly, and to a certain extent in COP27 as well, is a lot of nations coming together who've got very significant political differences, very significant different political systems from which they go back. But, when we're trying to unite the world, we've got to accept that not every country is a democracy, and we can't impose that on countries. We have to actually let them find their own way and deal with them as they are at the present time.
Okay, thank you, Keith. Andre, would you respond? Would you like to respond? Yeah.
Was that me?
No.
No, it was me. I just wanted to respond because I would like to disagree. I'm obviously agreed with the core of what you say, Keith, but there is an issue here, which is we have a common ground. For example, we're discussing today the lies of media. We're discussing the way wrong and right is being put against each other. Yeah. And the point is that we have a common ground because what we are trying to do is to fight those who are fighting us. It's the elites against the people. And it's very simple. Their fight is extremely simple. And it's so well known and demonstrated. There is so much substance out there, scientific writing, for example, explaining the issue. Yeah, even the German government does so. Yeah, the German government is publishing the numbers of how the very rich, use every mean they can to divert our attention, to keep us busy. So we can find, I think we can find really the commons. We can do it. Okay. And I think we can go for one push.
Okay, thanks, Andre. John Morris, would you like to have anything to say today? Are you there, John?
Yes, but no, thank you, Vijay. Thanks very much indeed to all the speakers anyway.
Thank you, John.
I would like to say something.
Okay. Oh, sorry, Lilias, go on.
Okay. Actually, all the speakers were very good, and they have present very good opinion and their thoughts about the issue. But I would like that to give some suggestion, like where the press freedom is ranked to 142 in the world ranking. It remains, and you have seen the assassination of a journalist, Arshad Sharif, which has been assassinated in Kenya. In those countries where we can find the truth, or where I'm a journalist. Basically, I introduce myself. My name is Fauzi Shaheen, and I'm the journalist. I have been working in media since for the last 30 years, and I have been running my own magazine, and I have a training center which name is Women Media Center, and we train a lot of women journalists about hardcore journalism. But if we are talking about the true media or truth about the democracy or the situation or the peace, we cannot do it in a proper way because we are afraid of doing it, because we have a lot of examples of assassination and threat in the media in our country. And apart from the world peace, I think this is my suggestion that the international powers, including the United Nations, should curb different kind of curb, like Israel aggression in the Middle East, ensure the implementation of the agreed two-state solution of the Palestinian issue, stop the forced construction of Jewish settlement in the Palestine territories, stop the Israeli forces from daily atrocities against the innocent Palestinians. Likewise, the human rights organization international powers that voice the brutal murder of Saudi-born journalist Khoshki now failed to show reaction about the case of Al Jazeera TV journalist Shiri Abu Akila, who was killed by Israeli forces. Due to the lack of strong international reaction and pressure, Israel has now announced that it will not take any action against the cop responsible for Shiri Abu Akila's murder and will not cooperate with the international investigation. It is necessary to ensure peace in this tense region. The arbitrariness, obstinacy, and aggressive attitude of any state must be eradicated. Otherwise, the powerful will go on the path of spring the weak and the spare. Conflict and strife will never be eradicated from the earth. This is my some opinion and suggestions. Likewise, we have issue in Pakistan, I mean in India and Kashmir. I think world power should come forward and they should resolve the issue between the India and Pakistan, because in Pakistani media has tried to resolve this issue through different initiatives like Ki Asha, peace for hope for and so we created initiative like SAFBA, South Asian Literary Forum Network, but they all are now gone. And and Pakistani media is now under threat in Pakistan. So how can we write down the truth? I mean, what is the procedure? What is the method to protect yourself or to protect the truth?
Yeah, I agree. And it's very difficult for journalists to do their work in Pakistan, and so is in India as well.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for your perspective. I'm going to just call a few people who haven't spoken, like Lilias. Yeah. Mute.
Okay, you can hear me, yeah?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. I'm sorry, I've forgotten the speaker who just spoke in front of me. I didn't write her name down.
Fauzia.
Sorry?
She's from Pakistan. Fauzia.
Fauzia. Okay, Fauzia. I am a very simple person, and I come across as a bit simplistic, but I think that a simple solution for any of these things, really, for any journalists who cannot work in their own countries, if they could communicate with journalists outside their country, and let the people outside the country publish it and send it back to the country in their names from people outside the country, so that the actual journalists won't be named as the writers of what they're writing. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a hub where you can go and do that. Maybe you have to invent one right now, because somebody was talking about a hub. Was it Norbert who was talking about the hub where you can go to and get real information and things? So if you had a hub of international journalists that you could get them to publicize your problems in the international, and they could send the articles back to the Indian and Pakistani newspapers, but with German names or Norwegian names attached to the articles, then the actual journalist wouldn't be named, and therefore wouldn't be under attack, maybe.
Okay.
Now, what I want to say, and what Keith Best said about treaties and laws, and you can't find the common ground. I want to say that the common ground has to be peace. There's no left and right and wrongs and rights. Peace is indisputably what we want. And I think there are two ways to peace. We can either talk and negotiate and try and settle things, or we can blow each other to kingdom come. And we will have peace because everybody will be dead. And if we carry on down these military routes, obviously that's what's going to happen. I think I said, I'm a very simple person. I see things very simplistically.
Okay, thank you.
But the other, I want to say a couple of things about this. Greta Thunberg said, everybody says they want peace, but we haven't got peace because somebody is lying. That's the first one. Secondly, I had another simple idea. In my own little community, I thought, how about I go next door to my next door neighbor and ask them to sign a piece of paper to say that I'm against war and I want peace. And I go to everybody in my town and get them to do this. Guess what? I forgot about the Peace Pledge Union.
Yeah.
That's what the Peace Pledge Union does. Not only do they make white poppies, they are called the Peace Pledge Union because they have a pledge. And when I heard GAMIP, and I can't remember who it was, VJ, in one of the GAMIP meetings, there was a woman from another country, and she said, how about we got everybody in the world to sign a pledge for peace?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. You come
Very
up
simplistic idea.
I think I can speak to that, VJ.
note of that. Okay.
It's Evelyn, VJ. It's Evelyn. I wonder if I could speak to that.
Yeah, Evelyn, yes. Go on.
I believe what you're referring to is the global peace statement. If you Google peace now, there is a global peace resolution where we are with GAMIP, or Peace Now and GAMIP together, are trying to get 1 billion signatures to this global resolution for peace.
I thought I'd had an original idea.
Thank you.
And I'm so pleased that it's not just me, we are all thinking this. Yes.
You are reaffirming the importance, so thank you for that.
Would you like to say something? Marilyn? Yeah, go on. Say something.
Thank you, Fiji. It's wonderful to be here and to listen to all of you and to learn so much. I would like to ask a question to Keith Best, when he spoke about outlawing war, that this could be done through nations. But then I think about what of the influence and big power of the big companies. So can nations do the job, or do we need the companies also to get involved in the process of outlawing war? That was my question to Keith.
Thank you. I'll answer briefly because I know we're coming to the end. First of all, I mean, it's not just governments, it's civil society and the multinationals. I mean, all have got to be actually moving in the same direction. And what's got to be shown is that peace is far more profitable and far more amenable than not having peace. The problem, and I share his views completely about wanting peace and signing up for peace, but it's rather like truth. One person's truth is another person's lie, and peace can be interpreted in so many different ways. Tacitus, the Roman historian, referred to a British chieftain referring to the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, as they create a desert and call it peace. Different people have different definitions of peace. For one country, peace may be domination of other countries, but that's not very peaceful for the people who are living in those countries. So I think, to a certain extent, we all of us could put together a shopping list of what peace means. It means living not in fear. It means living not in fear of discrimination or fear of being singled out because of our nationality, our colour, our religion, or our beliefs. But of course, like freedom of speech, one person's freedom of speech is another person's humiliation. So there has to be balance in all these things, and we have to understand that not all the world, as I tried to point out in my few remarks, lives in a democracy, and we have to look at, well, what does peace mean for the Chinese? What does peace mean for people living in Russia? What does peace mean living under other autocracies in the world? What do they want? What is their peace? We know what our peace is. So there's got to be a lot of work done to try to bring together some common norms. And it's not impossible. It's been done. I mean, we've seen such massive advances over, frankly, since the Second World War. Yes, many of those advances have been as a result of bitter conflict and nations suddenly waking up to the fact that we can't do that. I mean, you have all these people like Churchill and Eisenhower, everybody at the end of the Second World War talking openly about world government. World government. Unfortunately, these days, if national leaders talk about world government, they get laughed at or put away in an asylum. We need to move back to those days of idealism, where actually, we had the Charter of the United Nations, we had the Bretton Woods institutions. So much was done. We need to move back into that period where actually there is a much greater common ground.
Thank you. Okay, Katrina, anything like to say, Katrina? No. Okay, now I'm going to give 2 minutes each. Would you like to?
Yes, I would like to say something. Sorry.
Okay. All right.
I would like to say something. I'm very happy to see and to hear the people who spoke today, and also the ones who made remarks and commented. See more of the situation as we should see it as it is. So if we speak about the mainstream media, we all know now we also have alternative media, people who message us about their experiences, about what they experience from different perspectives. So, and I'm very happy to hear people speak that the realization is coming in that there is not such a big difference between all of us. We have a shared DNA. We are all humans. We are humanity, and we are being ruled by a 1% powerful bunch of plutocrats who know that we are going to discover it too. So the diversification through media to separate us all. I'm very happy that we start to realize that we should unite together. We should realize we're all brothers and sisters. We are different from each other because we all want the same thing. Okay. And this is what I'm happy about. It
got very short of time.
Sense here.
Ed, you wanted to...
Yes, I just thought that. You hear me?
Yes, we
yep.
Yep. Okay, well, I'm a media producer here in the United States, and I have a show on Free Speech TV. And we're talking about journalists being assassinated. You know, we don't assassinate journalists usually in the United States, but we do disappear them. And you know, the United States has disappeared all kinds of people that are, you know, talking about an alternative vision of what this war is actually about, right? And so I've been trying to drill in on that on my show, and I think really this is a war on Russia that was started by the United States. Basically, you know, Putin backed him into a corner where he didn't have any choice but to intervene in order to, you know, save the people of the Donbass. And you know, we know that, you know, of course, people are saying that Crimea should be returned and all that. But the thing about it is the people of Crimea voted overwhelmingly to leave and rejoin Russia. And the same thing has just happened. And it doesn't matter whether it was actually legal. What matters is that is the will of the people. And I don't think they're going to come back after being bombed for 8 years. You know, I've been listening to you know, interviews by people after they voted, and when that's what they said, we're not going back to Ukraine. You know, they think we're subhuman, and they've been bombing us, our civilian areas, for 8 years. So, at any rate, just getting back to what you were saying, talking about what, you know, how do we actually stop this? And you know, this is an effort by the United States to maintain a unipolar world. And of course, you know, that's what Putin and Xi and everybody are basically talking about. If you're listening to them talking, but they're not, you know, the only ones. They are the journalists that are being disappeared in the United States. There's a lot of them are saying this also. And so, you know, it's the United States' effort to maintain a unipolar world, and you know, what is it, multi-spectrum dominance. But you know, and Europe is getting the shaft, and so what I'm interested in participating in this was because you're all from different countries, and you know, I think it's going to take force to get peace. It's going to take people getting out in the street and just stopping, you know, war, because you know they're you know, the elites that are running the governments, they're all you know, in on this. And you know, it's basically destroying the economy, and people are getting really angry. And so I'm interested in other people's perspective on what's happening in their countries.
People,
Can I speak? Nobody can speak at the moment. It's all question.
Go ahead, please.
Okay. Jonathan Swift wrote a book called Gulliver's Travels. And apparently in Gulliver's Travels, there was a war, an ongoing war that had been going on for a long time. And it was the big enders and the small enders. The war was about, should you eat your boiled egg at the big end or at the small end? So the story is about two opposing ideas. And from my definition of peace, Keith, is people stop killing each other. Once you stop killing each other, then you can start talking about things. But when you're being bombed or blown up, or you're scared of being blown up, or somebody's going to come to your house and shoot you, or whatever, you know, that's not peace. Peace is when, and I wanted to try and show you this because I discovered this the other day in a museum in Rustington, next door to where I live. This were the peace celebrations. We did actually have peace. It was official. I think it was on the 11th of November, at 11 o'clock in the morning in 1918. We had peace very briefly, but unfortunately, somehow it slipped through our fingers and it all blew up. And since then, instead of the First World War being the war to end all wars, it opened the floodgates, and now the wars are getting bigger and bigger and stronger, and now we've got nuclear weapons and all this kind of stuff. You know, the secret is to stop killing people. We can have different ideas, we can talk about them, we need freedom of speech, obviously, and we try not to humiliate other people with our freedom of speech, but we've got to stop killing people.
Running out of time. Two more. One is Brian Cooper and other is Norbert, and then we can close. Brian, would you like to say something?
I just wanted to add that part of the problem is not just that the media manipulate reality, but they often ignore it. I think whole issues are omitted from the media and only get forced into the media because of some terrible incident or so on. I mean, in Britain, for example, the question of homelessness has been off the agenda. It's beginning to get force itself back onto the national agenda because of terrible cases coming to light. But we need to make sure that the media do not deliberately ignore issues. I think there's too much deliberate omission of key issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Norbert?
Yes, thank you. Very briefly, betterworld.info is, I used to say in the past, the Wikipedia for links and the Google directory for NGOs and citizens. In fact, for those things, it is better now than Wikipedia and the Google directory. And we really need people not just to share the message, but also to help research, and if they like, to write content, which is a new feature we will do. You can see it on the piece web part of betterworld.info. Let me stop here, but please really check it out and see what it is worth.
Because we run out of time, and I know we could carry on this conversation for another half an hour or 1 hour. So it's my now turn to thank all the distinguished speakers and the audience. And I think there will be a recording of this meeting today, which we will try to send it to all. Just imagine, I haven't got, like there are, I can see new faces today. So all of you got my email address. Can you send me your email addresses so I can send you the recording and speeches, and also a request to all the speakers to send their speeches, as we will be making a new newsletter in which they will be recorded, and a message to add. If you like any of the speakers, invite them to your show. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Vijay. Thank you. Thanks to you.
Thank you.
Lovely to see you, Vijay. Lovely to see you, Brian. Lovely to see you, Rose.
Thank you.
Lovely to see you, Alison. And everybody from Scammit.
Well done.
Yeah, and Paul.
Yes, very good.
And Katerina.
Take care.
And Luke, I don't know where Luke's gone. Goodbye, Luke. See you soon.
Thank you, Lydia.
Good luck to everybody. Carry on the good work.
All the best. All the best.
Bye for now. Bye-bye.